welcome back to Coaching with the Bible. This is episode 102, season 2, episode 48. Portion of the week is the portion known as Re'eh. It's the fourth in the fifth book of Moses, known as Re'eh. Our topic this week, home. Many of you know that I'm a bit of a baseball fan. Unfortunately, I root for a team that hasn't won in a very long time and consistently disappoints. But beyond just sort of being a fan of a specific team, I am also a fan of the game, and I'm interested in the game, and I like the game, and I know some people do not. It's boring, and it's long, and it takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of rules, and all that I get. But for me, it is a game that I still follow more than I think any other one of the sports that are out there that perhaps I followed when I was a kid. And in baseball, there is a lot of symbolism. There are a lot of rules, but there's a lot of symbols and a lot of things that are meaningful. And in particular, home plate has significance. Everything on some level revolves around home plate. If you're not a baseball fan, just give me a couple of minutes here to explain. Home plate is where a player comes to hit the ball. Another player who's on the bases, running around the bases, is trying to touch home plate to score a run. Pitchers and catchers and fielders are trying to stop their opponents from reaching home. It's a central location and a central symbol of the game and actually in the game. So I was reading an article earlier on the history of the base and the history of that symbol. And it's, for me, super interesting. So I like this thing. So it's interesting for me. It's not interesting for everybody. But the author makes a very powerful point. When you're talking about home, and particularly here he's talking about home base or home plate, home is rugged. He writes, home is fixed into the earth. It's trod upon, but it's precious. Home is an altar. It is protected. It is defended. It is cleaned. It represents the sacred amidst the profane. It's like a religious icon. And so the concept of home is a very powerful concept. When we're little kids and we're playing the game of tag, so there was home base. There was sort of this space in the game where you were safe. Unless you were one of the tag brothers, and if you know what I'm talking about, it's a group of 10 friends who've been playing the same game of tag for 30 years. In that game, there is no home base. There is no safe space. There is no place where someone is not in the game. But when we were little kids, there was a place you were trying to reach that was a safe space, a safe place. It was home base that you couldn't be tagged. You couldn't become, quote unquote, it in that space. There's a place called home, and it's significant and it's important. When we think about all the places that we've lived in our lives, we've lived in a lot of houses, perhaps, but I wonder how many of them would we consider home? Those are not the same thing. We use them synonymously, and we interchangeably will say, you're invited to our house for a party. Please come to our home. Our house is located at X location. We use them interchangeably. But I think when we consider the words more carefully, we realize that there's a difference. The house is sort of related to every other house. There are many houses on the street. The home, though, is identified specifically and uniquely as the place where you live. So when I'm inviting someone over, in theory, maybe the language should be, you're invited to our home. A home senses more personably, more emotionally, more connectedly to the individual. Admittedly, our homes have an emotional attachment to them, whether we like it or we don't. But when we talk about the concept of home, we can also appreciate the flip side. We talk about the homeless. People come from a broken home. Person who can't go home. We sense what that means, even if we've never experienced those things. When people think of certain places where they've lived, maybe they don't think of that as home. That couldn't have been a home. So there was an athlete I remember years ago who talked about the fact that his home was the gym where he played basketball. That's where he was home. His actual home, i.e., where his family lived, was not a place that he felt at home. What does that mean? It seems to mean that that was not a place that he could be himself. That was not a place where he had actual positive emotional attachment. That was not a place where he belonged. That was not a place where the person themselves was not free to simply be who they wanted to be who they needed to be in their own skin. It's not a comfortable space. And so it's sort of an interesting thing to think about the concept of home. It comes up in the Bible this week because a lot of this week's reading is simply about the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, the home where the people of Israel will set themselves up to build a covenantal society. That home, that location, that place, that home is the land of Israel. And so the Bible sets out some of the rules, basically, of what that home should be or should not be, how that home should be cared for, and how that home should be kept. Certain things that can be in that home, certain things that can't be in that home. That home has to be, on some level, like we mentioned, home plate in baseball, it's a place of the sacred. The profane is not welcome. And so the Bible sets out the idea that idol worship is not welcome. All of the things that connect to idol worship not only simply can't be there, they have to be destroyed, removed completely from being. If people in the community, shift off and have an interest in considering other faiths, same thing, wiped away. Appreciating that the blessings that come with staying in the sacred allows that home to grow. Allows that home to be a place where further acts of sanctity, connectedness, holiness can actually come to being. Years ago, I wrote an article on synagogue, on whether or not people appreciate their synagogue, how people connect or attach to that spiritual home, as it were, and how they don't. How do they think about that? What do they think about when they're not there? What I mean is that when we sort of winnow it down a little bit, the Bible is not just talking about the land of Israel, it's also focusing in on the holiest location in that land of Israel, the Holy of Holies, the place where the temple was to be built in Jerusalem. So it goes from the land to the city, right, to the city of Jerusalem, from the city of Jerusalem to the Holy of Holies, the most sacred place where the temple would be built, and what would take place there, what would happen there, the actions, the commandments, the activities that would go on there, that would be celebrated there, that would be commemorated in that space. And then the idea of taking those things home. And so what you get is this sort of picture that what home seems to mean, should be, is that home informs one's life. It's reflective, so like we're offended when someone comes to our home and thinks we have bad taste because we believe it's reflective of us. Or when I was reading an article by an architect, when people are designing their homes, he tells a story of the fact that he got a call in the middle of the night by someone whose home he was designing, and the person asked him, "What kind of tap am I?" Sounds like a silly question, but basically the person was going through a catalog of faucets, and they wanted to know what faucet they should pick, and they were very much identifying or feeling like they are going to be identified by the faucets that they choose. And so we are partially culturally focused when we're building our homes and setting up our homes and decorating our homes and thinking about the things that we're putting into our homes or the things that we're not putting in our homes, because we believe to be reflective of who we are as people. And we want people to view our homes as places where they would feel comfortable as well. And so the Bible is sort of giving this expansive and yet very exclusive and specific understanding of what it means to have a home, to build a home, to set a home, to maintain a home, things like that. And then when we think about it in our own lives and how that manifests, and so as I said at the outset, there are places where we have lived, there were houses that we lived in, but perhaps those weren't actually home. So for example, let's say you're newly married or you're moving out of your parents' home to your first place on your own, and it's an apartment somewhere. So if you're there for a short period of time, where the expectation is that it's a short period of time, it might not take on for you the connotation of home. It's sort of a halfway house to your next location, right? But there are other places that clearly are home. So in our case as a family, we lived in one location for 10 years. And that house wasn't just a house, it was home. That's where all of our, that's where children grew up. They spent many years there. We had a lot of friends there, many happy, wonderful occasions in that place. We have very fond memories of it. But, admittedly, after we moved, and I started to, at the time, was traveling month to month for work, and I would drive by the old place, at a certain point, it ceased being home. Simply just a memory. So the things that happen in it are the meaningful part. The actual building, not crucial at all. I would say to some degree the same thing with respect to the house, the home I grew up in. The physical structure in Brooklyn, New York, I've been by a couple of times over the years certainly since I moved out, but certainly since my parents moved out as well. And now it's just sort of like, in my mind, a landmark in my mind as to the place I grew up. But when I drive by, it's now just a building. It's a house. The home is sort of the experiences, the emotions, the moments that took place inside that I carry with me wherever I go. Right? Same idea with that temple is that wherever I go, I carry my experiences in that place with me. When I leave my home on a business trip or on a vacation, that new space, hotel, Airbnb, whatever it is, does not take on the sense of home. It's just a place I'm staying. I can go there and feel good about going there because I know that I have a good home. I have a nice place to return to. I have a warm, welcoming, loving, kind, happy home to return to. So the sense then of home is not necessarily the building materials, but the emotions that we actually build into it. And so when you read about all these different kinds of ideas with respect to people's homes, that's sort of what we're thinking about here. If a person has a place that they feel is home, it means that they have a place where they belong. It has a place where they can go that they don't have to be judged. And it's a place where they can be comfortable being themselves. And it's a place that is effectively a base for them to then go and do the things that they want to accomplish and do in the world, because they know that they always carry that home with them, and that home is always there for them. We don't get a lot of places like that in our lives. So it's important that as leaders and as individuals and as family people, that we try to work to build our homes a certain way, to think about the things that we put in it, and to think about the things that we leave out of it that make them home. Same goes for work. When we're trying to build an office, a place where people come together to do great work, so if it's a cold and sterile environment that has no emotions, then people don't want to be there. It doesn't create perhaps the environment of connection, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. It doesn't perhaps foster any sense of team or any sense of wanting to work together or creating together. And so we have to think about What are the things that make our house into our home? What are the things that make our office spaces and our workspaces, assuming we're looking to do that, into places that are on some level like home? So maybe it's partially it's the people that we bring into it. Partially it's the emotion that we bring into it as well. Maybe it is a little bit the decoration, how we make it, how we design it and how we have it look so that it feels like a place where people want to come into. So you'll see in a lot of places, certainly with a lot of like startups and new companies, that they build like the coolest offices, right? And so they'll put, really great kitchen space and snacks and pool tables and comfortable chairs and couches and interesting art on the walls, and they'll paint it certain colors and the floors will look a certain way because they're trying to, on some level, manufacture, but they're trying to create an environment of collaboration, but also a space of comfort where the people that are coming in to do the work can do great things together. And if they don't want to be there, it's not comfortable being there, if it feels like a government office, so it's not going to work. It's simply not going to be. So we have to think about the places where we are, the places that we go, and the things that we do. And we know, as Dorothy said, there is no place like home. That's certainly true. But the question becomes a question of how we design it and how we build it. What are the things that we put into it, that make it into home? How do we design it? Do we build into it spaces that are really comfortable? Do we appreciate the dings and the scratches and the flaws of it? Do we appreciate sort of the quote unquote the smells of it, the good smells, not the terrible smells, the good smells? What makes that the case? Like in our home, I would say that the symbolic spaces that are most indicative of our home are probably the kitchen and the dining room, living room area. So the kitchen, we spend a lot of time in the kitchen, a lot of meals, a lot of cooking, a lot of prep, things like that. And everyone seems to flow through that space. We want that space to be a place where we go. But more than that, I want to think about also here, so we're thinking about, as in terms of a coaching perspective, thinking about what does our home look like? How does it reflective of us? How did we think about it? How do we connect to it or not connect to it? How are we designing it, perhaps forward, if we want to change it, to become more of a place of belonging, of connection, of warmth, of all of those emotions that we're looking for? And perhaps one other way to really do that is to think about the rituals that you create in that space. What are the rituals of that space? Like, do you have meals together in a certain location? Do you cook together? Do you, make movie night for the family on a certain night that you're going to be, sanctity and sanctified time and space with the people that are there? So obviously we want to know about the people that are there, but that's how we sort of think about it, because you're creating memories, you're creating moments, you're creating feelings and connections and emotions. And on some level, you're creating that sense of happiness and joy that everybody wants to have in their lives. So what we have then is this incredible concept here that the Bible is describing, is this development of home. And the question then for us as we go out today from Coaching with the Bible is, how do we design our home? What are we thinking about our home? What are we putting into our home? How do we make that more of a home for all the people that we care about and all the people that are part of our lives? That is Coaching with the Bible for this week. See you next week. Have a good one.